I think we really, really underestimate just how hard the challenge of building nationhood in such a diverse society is.
Compared to other countries in the world, there is still a sense of nationhood. You know, we're still Indians despite attempts at polarization. Many countries just disintegrated because of that. So always, you know, the balance sheet will always be a little bit mixed, but on the pure economic and social human development outcomes, we have, if anything, underperformed.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. You know, that's a really important and giant book that you've written. You know, I want to just delve into it a little bit first, Arvind. That what was the premise of going back these 75 years? You know, what is it that you really wanted to diagnose about India? And if you were to distill this giant of a book, like I said, down to 4 or 5 key points, when you looked over its entire history, what was that?
So first of all, Shoma, thanks for having us, and thanks to all of you who've shown up in this rainy, inclement weather. So I think there were two parts to your question. Why did we write this, and what is the, as you would say, the elevator pitch of this book?
Yes.
And I need Devesh's help because these are not easy questions. I mean, I think the why we wrote this was because I think we felt that there was a gap in what existed out there on India, in the following sense, that, you know, development is something that's multifaceted. And most previous attempts at doing this for India, and there are some great works on India, you know, Bhagwati and Desai, Shukamoy Chakravarti, lots of people have written, political scientists have written this. But because Devesh and I felt that development is a much broader task, especially for a nascent country like India, you know, you have to forge a nation, a new nation, right? It's very easy to have a geography, but to create, you know, you've created India, but you have to create Indians. How was that done? You have to create, in fact, reconfigure a colonial state into a modern developmental state. You have to build an economy, and you have to change society. So you have to analyze all these, and uniquely in the case of India, all this was done through democratic politics on a country, as it were, that's the largest in the world in scale and arguably the most diverse. So it's just a complex transformational problem, and we felt that this hadn't been attempted for India. And, you know, economists have a very narrow view, political scientists have a narrow view, and we thought we'd bring together our thing to do this, you know, big effort at so that's the real reason we did that.
Right.
On the elevator pitch, Devesh, do you want to go first, or you, and then I'll follow because.
So, you know, there's you asked like why we wrote the book. So to quote John F.
Sorry,
Kennedy,
will you just speak into the
okay.
mic?
You asked why we wrote the book. So one way to answer it, like Kennedy said, why not? You
Why
asked
not?
why? Yeah, I mean, I think we both had a palpable sense of dissatisfaction with what was out there. I think academia has become very narrow. I mean, we are really confined to within our disciplines. But of course, what happens on the ground, realities, they don't follow these tight to the disciplines.
Right.
And both of us come with very varied academic backgrounds. And so to think through this was as much an intellectual joy and journey for us. I think what we were determined was, one, not to go in with any preconceived notions that this was the story, but to make sure that we really build data on almost every aspect of like development and allow the story to come through the data rather than have a story and look for data to back our priors. So that was one difference. The second difference was we did not want to judge the past through the lens of the present. It's very easy, that old saying from Hegel, the owl of Minerva flies at dusk.
Sorry, Devesh, I'm going to ask.
The owl of Minerva flies at dusk. It's very easy to say, oh, Nehru did this wrong, or this was that. So what we build is a set of about 3,000 plus official government reports and documents on every aspect, and read through how they were seeing it at that point of time. What were the constraints they were seeing? How were they seeing their reality, rather than for us to see it and make these judgments? So these were the two, I think, distinctive approaches we brought to this project.
But to answer, build on what Devesh said, what's the elevator pitch of the book, So the first thing is that I think we strenuously stayed clear of trying to be reductive about what happened in the past. So it's very easy to say, oh, it's all about economics, or it's all about politics, or it's all about this. And India, the historical experience, has just been too complex, too rich, and too textured to fall into any easy generalization. But having said that, we do have one or two big themes that run through the book. And one of them is what we describe as in the term precocious.
Precocious.
Okay? So there are two or three senses in which we use the term precocious. One is, if you look at politics, India was a precocious democracy, i.e. it adopted democracy unlike other countries. See, there are two models of development around the world. One model, which is the Western model, is where you have slow economic progress and political development and the franchise happens slowly and along with economic progress. The other model is the East Asian model, very successful economically over very shorter periods of time, but the political development follows the economic development, like in Korea or Taiwan, or doesn't happen at all, as in the case of China. And India just defied this model completely. So that's the sense in which there's precocious. It's also precocious, which we can go into in the fact that we did services much more than manufacturing. But there's an even deeper sense in which we define precociousness, is that the Indian policy setup made some very unusual choices, like, for example, emphasizing higher education over basic education, emphasizing disease control and population control over public health, emphasizing welfare and redistribution over creating public goods like infrastructure, health, etc. So the bottom line, I would say, is that India is just a fascinating development experience, partly captured in this precocious concept, but much richer than that as well.
I want to open up some of those, but I wanted to share with the audience, because quite often now there's a great impatience with the economic history of India, and there's also a very fashionable position that Nehru got it totally wrong. But, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that before we go to the future. But just 2-3 data points which are really, sobering and make you wake up, is that when, in 1947, there were only 18% of Indians who were literate. The life expectancy was 32, and every woman's, birth rate was about 6 children to a woman. So that's and then of course there was all the wounds of partition and a feudal, poor, impoverished state that we took up. So to give adult franchise overnight was really, like you said, a precocious idea and not been done anywhere in the world. So when you diagnose this, I wanted to, and the reason I'm asking you to distill such a big book is because I want to also look at what your prognosis is for the future. But when you diagnose this, first, do you think that that was a mistake, to give political agency overnight, regardless of caste, class, education, gender, race, religion? Do you think that that was a sublime thing that has played out, or was it a mistake?
So, look, we are very clear in the book that we shouldn't make the democracy this shibboleth that it gave and it took away. But the unique part of what democracy did for India, what we say in the book, very distinctive from what it did, say, in the West, it was the key instrument of nation building. I think we really, really underestimate just how hard the challenge of building nationhood in such a diverse society is. So many large countries, federal systems, whether the Soviet Union or Yugoslavia or civil wars that we see in Nigeria or we've seen in Sudan, etc. We really show that India, contrary to what people think, stands out that in the process of nation building, how little violence there was. India is a complete outlier. We can look at England, we can look at France, we can look at China, we can look at the US. All these countries had massive amounts of violence in the process of nation building. India avoided that, and it avoided that because it did not choose a single religion or a single language as the basis of nation building. Instead, it chose democracy as the instrument of nation building.
So just to add to what Devesh said, two things to say. See, one is that people often ask this question, democracy, whatever, good, bad, why did we choose? To me, I think if you look at it historically, India had no choice but to adopt democracy. It was hardwired, partly for the reasons that Devesh just said, but also, if you go back in 1928, there was a Motilal Nehru Committee report. It was actually a report written by Motilal Nehru and some people, and Pandit Nehru also joined that. In 28, this is very early on, they discussed whether India should have universal political franchise, and they came down saying, of course, there is no alternative but to choose universal, even for women. And the arguments they gave dismissing, not having this, were amazing and way ahead of its time. So in a sense, the question is almost irrelevant because it was hardwired. But having said that, Devesh spoke about all the good things that democracy did, but we should also not be under any illusions that democracy is this great panacea for everything, because in the last chapter of the book, we say democracy is a little bit like liquid oxygen, that famous quote from that movie, the liquid doesn't allow you to die, but the oxygen,
No, the opposite. Oxygen doesn't allow you to die.
So democracy is that heady oxygen, but it also actually held back India in several ways. Just to give you one example.
That's like setting a shiver down my spine that we are actually publicly saying this.
No,
it's such a dangerous idea.
No, I think we have to be realistic because nothing comes
written in stone.
Or written in stone or completely
not black
without
and white.
thing. Just to give you, there are many ways in which it did that. But just to take one example, corruption is a big fact of Indian politics, right? But what has happened in India is that we now, so this is a statistic we give in the book, that the average time between elections, which used to be 5 years in the first 30 years, is now just over 1 year. So that almost every year we're having massive elections. Elections now need more and more money. And just this facet of democracy, contributes to and, becomes a point for corruption, which has deleterious effects on the system. But so I think we should celebrate our democracy, but we should also not be blind to some of the challenges it's posed, and there are many.
Can I just add?
Well, okay.
Just a quick thing. See, I think we should be careful. We often use the term the democracy and we all think we know exactly what it means. But actually we don't. We have reduced democracy to elections. That is the fundamental lens through which we think about democracy. Of course, it has many other facets which we've tended to underplay, whether it's civil liberties, rule of law, all of these other...
No, the constitutional...
Right. I mean, I think as we look back, one of the biggest weaknesses in the Indian Constitution, which was a fabulous document, was it never defined political parties. And one of the biggest weaknesses, and you talked about with the speaker earlier, the fact that political parties have become like family-owned businesses, is because surprisingly, the word political party is not even mentioned in the Constitution. But of course, you cannot have elections without political parties. And the governance of political parties in India has fewer rules than a small-scale enterprise has. Even though these are the, that they should have internal to democracy, they should have transparent accounts, all the things that if a company doesn't file its annual returns for 3 years, it can be struck off. Political parties just go on. So there are weaknesses and we would be...
Actually, that's a really good innovative idea, that political parties should have rules, for existing, That's a powerful idea to put out. But I just want to come back to, when you said that democracy was not economically, as proficient for India. I again want you to spell that out a little bit, Arvind, because there is this sense, almost a kind of yearning that we took the China route, or that immediately one should have gone from colonialism to capitalism. So there's a great impatience with the socialist years of India. There are others who will argue that the Nehruvian generation may not have taken us on the fast train of economic progress, but it kind of deepened the idea of the nation state, participation, a sense of the collective, and that, economic progress could have come later. Maybe Indira Gandhi should have shifted gear. So two questions. One, that do you think democracy was not proficient? And second, that again, there's this nostalgia that we should have gone straight away into capitalism. Do you think that would have been a better route for India?
Yeah. So let me kind of combine these two questions. See, part of looking back with a kind of generous perspective, that is, you neither romanticize the past, nor you have the condescension of posterity, because you have to look at what happened at that time. Now, there were some choices made at that time which reflected what many, many countries around the world were doing. So whether it was planning, whether it was shutting us off to foreign competition, the whole protectionism, whether it was emphasizing public sector enterprises, that these were all part of the thinking of that era. Well, remember, the US had just had the New Deal, Europe had turned towards the welfare state, Russia at that point, the Soviet Union, we thought was doing very well. So there were some choices that were, I think, understandable, given the intellectual zeitgeist of the times. But there were some choices that we made which were neither democratic nor socialist in any strict sense of the term. I'll give you one example. Take industrial licensing, that is what we did to our domestic private sector. There was nothing about socialism or democracy that required us to do that, right? But we did that.
So the whole license Raj.
The license, yeah? And remember, this is not licenses to import or to trade. These were licenses that
produce
domestic private sector. So we stymied our domestic private sector, which set us back, 30 years. The other thing is that not emphasizing primary education and public health. Now, I think that's a choice that may have been due to democracy. We don't know. Devesh thinks that most autocracies provided education. But that was something that had much more to do with our society and our caste structure and nothing to do with democracy per se. So in that sense, the choices that were made were partly reflected the zeitgeist. The final thing I would say is that, but the tragedy of India, even in terms of those choices that went wrong, was not that we got into it, which is understandable, that over time we were not able to get out of it. So the central Indian challenge or problem, as it were, over these is what we would call the Chakravyuha challenge. Like Abhimanyu can get in, but he can't get out. Like in the case of the public sector enterprises, the farm subsidies, and so on.
Right.
So, just to illustrate one example, we use these terms without ever questioning socialism. So we give you an example in the book, the heavy engineering corporations. Some of you might, this was the time of setting up heavy industries. We set up this firm in the early 1960s. It was supposed to supply the heavy machinery for cement plants, for steel mills, etc. We took about 5,000 acres of land from tribals. We paid them about 1,000 rupees per acre. Even that, we did not give them the money for years. Then that firm, in the 65 odd years it has been in existence, did not make a profit in any single year. Eventually, we found it did make a profit in 1 year. It made a considerable amount of profit. How did it make a profit? It sold 100 plus acres of land that it took from tribals for about 1,000 rupees an acre and sold it for 1 crore per acre. This is what we call socialism. How in the hell can one define this as socialism?
So, in fact, you have another very shocking, anecdote in your book about the fertilizer subsidies, where for every ingredient there was a different subsidy. For NKP, there's a different subsidy, different ingredients, different inputs. So it is Kafkaesque, in that sense.
But sorry, Shoma, on the fertilizer subsidy, you use the past tense. What we say in the book is that this is not what happened. This is the regime today on the fertilizer subsidy. It is the most complex system of human imagination that even Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva could not have thought of. And yet, it is still there today. So as they say, the past is never dead.
And also, vastly, most of the subsidies, fertilizers, meant for quote-unquote farmers, goes to the top 5-10% of the farmers. So the rich get most of the subsidies, whether it is electricity, whether it is fertilizers, and we continually try and defend it.
So I want to,
No, see, it's an important point about this is because there is nothing about democracy. You can say democracy, give free power to the poor, give free subsidies to the poor, for poor farmers. But 60 to 70% of all these subsidies go to 5 to 10% of the population. There is nothing about either democracy or socialism that justifies that.
Yeah, so I'm going to come to the new era where you say a lot of macro infrastructure has been created and the new welfareism. But 2 things before that. One, just coming back to the election question earlier, that now there's a lot of talk and acceleration to one nation, one election. You said that the entire cycle of election has got compressed. So are both of you in favor of one nation, one election? And there's the anxiety around it is that now there's a plurality of voices, there's a kind of check and balance that happens. Society has a safety valve every now and then. But if it is one nation, one election, yes, it'll be more efficient, but that it'll become even easier to centralize the entire execution of the elections and the public mood. So where do both of you stand on that?
No, I think we are very clear in the book that there is no doubt that the frequency, because remember, after the 73rd, 74th Amendment, we now have local elections, right? Both rural and urban, which have vastly increased the number of elections. And with that, very importantly, the need to raise money. You cannot have a democracy without elections. You cannot have elections without cash. And that cash has to be now raised day in and day out, the more frequent the elections. We simply cannot avoid that reality. However, it is also the case that each level, federal, state, and local, acts as a little bit of check on the tier above it, right? So what we argue, what we don't realize, local elections are conducted by state election commissions. If you think there are problems with the Central Election Commission, have a look at what the state election commissions are doing. They make the Central Election Commission look positively virtuous. Okay? We focus too much on what happens at the center. We forget just how authoritarian many of our states are. We forget just how badly the institutions they run are. And therefore, they have stymied the 73rd and especially 74th Amendment. So what we argue is that have at least the central and local elections concurrently and state elections separately, so that the state elections are a check on the center and the local elections, by not being concurrent with the state elections, are a check on the states.
So I think that I would say, I would generalize it by saying that, look, that there's a trade-off between all the benefits that you said that come from multiple elections and the costs associated with that. And there has to be some trade-off between that, which this idea is one of many ways of doing it. But the key point is that you have to trade off the benefits and the costs. And so no extreme solution is good, either one or the current system, some trade-off, some balance.
Right. So, when you were talking about all these mistakes that were made, or, things that were done in the name of socialism just ended up being not that you're distributing wealth or equalizing, the benefits of society, but that you were nationalizing it, But strangely, both of you make an argument that it's not that one can think academically or theoretically or with a vision for a new way of doing it. You said that in India, all the economic sort of pivots have come out of a state of shock. What do you mean by that? And why is that a necessity? Like today, I mentioned earlier to KTR that across the world, there's an anxiety that we're entering a completely new economic reality, where if all these technological forces deliver as they are being said to deliver, then countries like ours will be in a serious state of shock. But that there's no frontal thinking about it. And you said right across Indian history, there hasn't been. We've changed because of circumstances and shock. Can you explain that?
Actually, what we say in the book that is that, just to preface that, why that's important. In the very last chapter, we're asked for, we say, all of you will say, we've written about the past, tell us 3 things for the future.
I do feel that.
Yeah,
Yes.
you feel that. And we, again, consciously resisted that. And the reason is that it comes out of this humility of understanding the past. We see from the past that there have been 3 agents, among others, I'm just summarizing, of what led to real change. One is crises. We know that the 91 crisis, because we ran short of foreign exchange, is that when we really shifted from socialism to a more market-oriented economy one. We should not forget in 1966, because of the major crisis we had of the war, is when we shifted to the Green Revolution and adopting new technologies for agriculture. So these were 2 major changes that happened because of crises. The second way in which has happened is technology. Technology, the best example is the telecom
mobile.
The mobile revolutions happen, and we can talk about it. But the third, I think, thing which I think is not appreciated enough is that economic growth itself was one of the major agents of change in India. So let me explain what that is, right? One, between, let's say 1980 and 2015, we saw the greatest reduction in poverty in India. Two, the major improvements in health and education, especially in terms of learning, happened in this era because growth provided the resources for the central and state governments to spend more. But more importantly, because people themselves realized that growth meant that the returns to education went up, and therefore they sought education, private tuition, private schools, and so on. So, and there are, and of course, Devesh has written about how growth facilitated social change in India. You know, the whole delinking of occupations from caste. Once there was mobility and growth, you could have that. So, crises, technology, and the consequences of growth itself were the big actors or drivers of change in India.
So, you know, I am going to ask you for some recommendations as well. But while we are still diagnosing the past, like I said, because there's this impatience in India with where we are at, and we look at where China is at, but we don't want to go live in China. You know, you still would prefer to live in disintegrating America rather than China. So the thing I'd like to ask is that when you look at this whole analysis of the past, are you somewhat satisfied with where we are? Given, like you said, this completely precocious, unprecedented nature of the Indian experiment, and from where we came to where we are, do you think that in the long run we've done pretty well?
Sorry, are you saying that after writing the book, we are satisfied with where India is today?
Yeah.
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, I genuinely ask that because there's such an impatience to want to become authoritarian, to, you know, do away with the mess of democracy, etc., etc.
No,
so with the mess of all this...
No, that's a step. I mean, one is the means to the ends. You're talking about the means. But if we are looking at
the outcome.
At the outcome, I think absolutely we are not such I'm certainly not. But that is a very different question from how can we do better and what are the instruments, what are the means. So these are two very different.
Right.
No, but on the outcomes themselves, I think what we show in the last chapter of the book, I mean, just look at two basic outcomes, right, which we care about. Per capita GDP. If there were 100 countries in the world, in 1950, we were about, you know, 70th or whatever, you know. Today, we're just, by 1980, we had deteriorated. And today, we're just marginally better. We're still well below the median in terms of global per capita GDP. We're about 60th in the rank. So how can you be satisfied with that? On the Human Development Index, we similarly show over 75 years, is that we have again done, probably again even a little bit worse, bottom 30% of the countries in the world. So these are all not satisfactory outcomes by any means at all. But then, you know, again, you can't be reductive because, you know, even in terms of outcomes, the fact that we've avoided violence that Devesh mentioned earlier, the fact that, you know, compared to other countries in the world, there is still a sense of nationhood. You know, we're still Indians despite attempts at polarization. Many countries just disintegrated because of that. So always, you know, the balance sheet will always be a little bit mixed, but on the pure economic and social human development outcomes, we have, if anything, underperformed.
Right, so that brings me to the question, you know, you've engaged very deeply with China, and Devesh, like you said, absolutely, in absolute terms, there's no way any of us can be happy with where India is on any of the indices that we care about, starting with air pollution, and you ended your book with that, you know, and we'll come to it. But without borrowing the authoritarianism of China, what is it that could have been done differently and can be done differently still? You said that from 1991, growth just brought its own momentum, you know? You're saying that we're still really low on all the indices, but we are positioning ourselves as the fastest growing economy, the 5th largest, soon to be the 3rd largest. So what is it that's still that's still going wrong? So I'm putting many questions. One, what can we learn from China, which is not authoritarianism? And two, what were the mistakes that have been made even after 1991, that with 25, 30 years of growth now, we still haven't done what China achieved in 30 years?
So I think, I think one of the things that we really can learn from China, they are surprisingly much more open to learning. Much more compared to us. I mean, I've been amazed that how open they are to ideas about how to improve compared to our self-satisfaction, which is a bit of smugness. And smugness is they are always impatient that they are not yet at the top. We are happy in wallowing in our mediocrity. Let's be very clear. And their ability to learn and learn constantly is extraordinary. And unless you are open to learning, this has got nothing to do with authoritarianism, sorry?
Sorry? Okay, sorry. We'll continue this and open it up to your question later, please. Okay. Ads, would you just help us manage that, please? Yes. I'm going to come back to you. I'll come back to you. Okay. That's really triggered you. Will you just... Okay. Yeah. So if you were... Okay, this has never happened before.
Okay. Sorry,
this is the most emphatic agreement anyone could have with you. You know, you said learning and you're in a loop about learning. Yeah. So to come back, you said that the Chinese are really open to learning and that we're not.
Yeah. And I think that part is something that is very.
Okay. Is he with somebody? Can someone help usher our guest out, please? Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you? I've lost my chain of thought.
Yeah, the question I'd asked was, what can we learn from China that is not authoritarianism?
So one is learning. See, but I would, put it the following way, right? One is we need to say learn from the outside, right? But one of the things we show in the book, and this relates to your previous discussion as well, which is a statistic that surprised us a lot, that 1/3 of India, and this is an important statistic, grew at almost Chinese rates of growth and for almost as long. So this is basically peninsular India. So the question then becomes not why did we not learn from the Chinese and the outside world, but why did the Hindi heartland not learn from the experiences within the country from Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, etc. Right? So I think so that's one thing. And just to give you one example, is that we say that you should look at the past so that you don't repeat the mistakes. But I think you also should look at the past to see what were the successes and the lessons from the successes. Let me give you one example. That between 1990 and 2015-20, by all accounts, the more open we became, the better we did. And that's true not at the central level, if you look at the states, all the successful states, they are much more open than the other states, whether it's manufacturing or services or labor, like in Kerala, more outward oriented. But think of this, the Congress party that presided over this, now in all its manifesto, never once talks about growth, openness, productivity, efficiency. It's nothing about increasing the size of the pie and only reducing, about redistributing it. This government, in beginning 2017, it unlearned the lessons of the past and started becoming more protectionist. Of course, it's changing now. But why is it that we don't even learn from our successes? Forget about learning from our failures.
So
Yes.
now I remember. So there are two other very distinctive aspects of China.
Will you speak into
Yeah, sorry. One is the extraordinary emphasis on higher education, meaning really building great universities for the creation of new knowledge. We really tend to blame the center and this government for doing this to our universities. But let's be clear, the destruction of India's higher education occurred at the states. Every state has deeply politicized, and I have to say that also includes this state. Every state really did politics in its public universities, and it destroyed the key foundation both of social mobility as well as of knowledge creation. The second is, we should also look at our private sector. India is an outlier among all large countries in that the share of the private sector in R&D is the lowest. I'm not talking of absolute amounts. I'm talking of share the government spends, the private sector spends, and universities and NGOs spend. India, the private sector spends the least. Look at the patterns that the Ambanis, the Reliance Group, and the Adani Group have. Compare it with Huawei or Samsung. It's orders of magnitude. So it's a broader thing. We shouldn't see this only as the central government doing mistakes. The mistakes are much wider, and therefore the challenge is greater.
See, I think on China, I think the more, I would say even more obvious lesson that we should have drawn is, Devesh spoke about higher education, but the complete failure of our primary and basic education, which, between 1950 and 1980, China was in utter chaos, political chaos, economic chaos. But even over that period, how much they increased enrollment, learning, public health was staggering. Today, I don't mean to be disrespectful to your host. KTR said that, we've done great things in primary education. But Devesh, while he was talking, looked at that thing. There are 25% of students in Telangana today who are out of school. So Pratham has documented how, and this too, remember, higher education at least is a prerogative of the center. Basic and primary education are all within the mandate of the state governments. So that's why we have a line in the book which says, whatever the center does badly in India, the states do much worse.
Wow. Well, that's a pretty depressing scenario. And I want to ask you one other question, which actually comes back to planning and pre-thinking things. I would say that China, and they're doing it even now, they may have over-invested, they may be overproducing, they have their own problems, of excess. But I think what KTR said was that if he got a chance to be the chief of the opposition, not even in government, is that he would have a map of the entire country, all the water resources, and he would deploy different approaches to different parts of the country. Landlocked Telangana will have one approach, coastal region will have another approach. One never seems to have a feeling that there is that kind of planning for the nation or pre-thinking that, okay, if AI is going to come, what are we going to do? What is the new economic levers we're going to need? There's none of that discussion. And you've been an economic advisor Arvind, does that kind of thinking at all exist in India? Is that something that China has which we don't have?
I mean, without wanting to get into, whether everything. See, I think when KTR spelled that out, certainly, it's a visionary, lots of visionary things that he says. But if you look at the last 10 years of elections in India, right? Every political party is promising freebies, do caste census, do reservations. These are all, the policy instrument of choice. What Devesh and I strongly think is that the political imagination of most of the leaders in India is stunted. Why is it that Uttar Pradesh and Bihar cannot say, we have the cheapest labor in the world. All the factories of labor-intensive goods that are leaving China, we will get those factories to come to our state, increase our private investment, increase employment, increase, inclusive growth and so on. Why is it that we don't see that political imagination in India? So a lot of what we blame democracy or the state is finally maybe just stunted political imagination because a history of doing the same things over and over again. But that's why I think India being so large, this competitive federalism dynamic should jerk and shake people out of their complacency. Tamil Nadu is attracting Foxconn. UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan should say, we will attract that Foxconn as well. So I think there's both a sad, tragic part of the stunted political imagination, but the hopeful part is, competitive federalism and examples can spread in India as well.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying that, when we have a chapter looking at different states, and one state we look at is sort of West Bengal, which was in the early 50s India's leading state, right? And it's a state that has absolutely the most steady decline relative to other states. We talk of the lack of imagination in the heartland. West Bengal was where the sort of Indian Renaissance, in a sense, began in the late 19th century. It was the center of industrialization, the center of higher education, of learning, of research, right? How do you explain its decline? And that clearly is, if you say, well, it's the opposition states, well, Tamil Nadu has an opposition party, so has West Bengal. Why has Tamil Nadu managed to do much better than West Bengal? So we have to ask harder questions of our states and not just focus on the central government.
So on West Bengal, I think it's something I find fascinating about democracy, it's true that a lot of accountability should happen between elections, but some amount of accountability should also happen at elections, right? So West Bengal has seen the steadiest long-run decline of its fortunes, from the richest now to very below median. But for 35 years, it had a party that presided over this decline, and yet it kept getting elected, re-elected, re-elected 7 times. So what does it say about democracy as an accountability mechanism that such things can happen?
No, in fact, Shoma, West Bengal is the only state over last 50 years, it has had only 3 chief ministers. 50 years, only 3 chief ministers. We normally think political stability should give you all these pluses. But actually, it's just constricted the imagination of what that state. The fact is, Bangladesh, which was partitioned from, as you know, and as we know around independence, East Pakistan was much poorer than West Bengal. On so many indicators, it's now doing better than West Bengal.
So I don't want to flog West Bengal. So, if you look at West Bengal, right?
As you can see, I have no identity
Yeah,
politics.
exactly.
I'm not standing up for Bengal at all.
So in the book, what we do is, we make 2 comparisons for Bengal. We say, you can say West Bengal and Bangladesh, one comparison, because there broadly you're holding culture constant and saying, what about the other factors? But then we also compare West Bengal and Kerala, where the ideology of communism, the left is common, and West Bengal does worse than Bangladesh and worse than Kerala. So both on culture and on ideology and politics, it does very bad. And the question is why? And that's the question.
And what if both of you are economists, political scientists, and sociologists? What's the answer? Why?
You want me to give a mischievous answer?
Yeah.
The mischievous answer is India's greatest economists are mostly Bengalis.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you on that, but Amartya Sen can't even speak up for himself now. So
The only two economics Indian Nobel Prize winners are Bengali, Amartya Sen and Abhijit Banerjee.
I want Abhijit to airdrop here right now, but Devesh, really, a more serious answer, why?
I genuinely believe that if there's one state that was let down by its intellectuals, it was West Bengal.
It's just a politer way of saying what I just said.
No, but I'm saying more broadly, I sort of grew up in that state. I was part, all the rallies, they were far more concerned about Cuba, about Vietnam, about imperialism.
China, don't you?
But the fact that the garbage was not collected, the fact that industries were dying, the fact that that for 100 years Indians came to Calcutta to look for livelihoods. And there's now, past quarter century, young Bengalis seek to leave Calcutta to seek their livelihoods. There is no better indicator of the confidence a people have in their future when the young vote with their feet.
By the way, that's also true of Punjab in spades. Huh?
Yeah, actually it's Punjab, and I was going to ask you both by the same yardstick, both UP and Bihar have been the crucible of both political momentum as well as intellect. I mean, some of the greatest intellectual history also was in Bihar and UP, not just politics, but even the bureaucracy, So what is about this entire Gangetic belt? What is going on over there?
No, look, this is something we don't really look into depth, so it's just I think the South gained because it had strong social movements prior to competitive electoral politics, which happened with the Justice Party here, the movements in Kerala against the caste system, which is so that we must remember, prior to the left front coming to power in 1950, Kerala was already a complete outlier in literacy. It had occurred prior to independence. So that what we say is many of core public goods are co-produced with society. The hierarchies of social hierarchies, which we know in India have been so acute and have been a big part of our political cleavages, those were not eradicated but had been attenuated by social movements in the South prior to electoral politics. Whereas in the North, that social movements did not occur. So then the burden on social change fell entirely on politics.
So I would add, so Devesh's explanation is, holds true and is very valid and can explain things up to a certain point, right? But, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, why did this continue? So that begs the question of why this continued, right? And so I would argue that, many, identity politics, in a way encrusted has much worse. The hold of the previously landholding caste, and this is actually a to give credit to Abhijit Banerjee, he has a paper which shows that those things still persist. But I do think that the post-independence arrangements, I'll highlight two, have contributed to this as well. One is the whole system of fiscal transfers in India. Raghuram Rajan and I wrote a series of papers on how aid can be detrimental. I.e., essentially that you get money which you don't earn yourself or tax yourself. The Indian fiscal arrangements, federal arrangements, while they were useful in bringing about some redistribution between poorer and richer states, they have gotten to a point where aid has become like a drug or a dependency, which means that these governments, and this is kind of coming to the criticism of some of the South, which has partial merit. Our federal arrangements have reinforced that. And in the case of Punjab, for example, all the subsidies that are going into this, which is provided by the central government, perpetuate this thing about, the whole agriculture, being stuck in agriculture. So the impetus for change and taking action on your own is impeded by some of these arrangements that we've put in place over the last 30, 40 years.
But just to also clarify, what we show empirically in the book, there's this whole debate, especially prominent here, about these are South-North transfers. That is not the case. The transfers are from the West to the north and east.
No.
What do you mean? You're saying it's not the rich southern states?
No. Sorry. Devesh, sorry, we have to be careful here. So the net transfer of resources is happening from the West, Haryana, and the South. So these are the countries that are, states that are transferring resources. But the point Devesh, I think, wanted to make was that the biggest provider of those resources is not the South, but the West. So
but by the West, you mean Haryana?
No, Gujarat and Maharashtra. Gujarat and Maharashtra and Haryana. So relative to how much they contribute to economic activity and how much resources that are, tax resources that are given, they are the contributors. But the beneficiaries are the Hindi heartland and the eastern states. But I think, without getting into the identity question, the point is the beneficiary states, there's like an aid curse that happens which prevents them from taking action.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, though this is fascinating and there's just endless amounts more that I want to ask you. But I had threatened that I was going to ask you for some prescriptions, And before that, when you were saying about this direct fiscal transfer, that we are hurtling towards a world where the absolute uber capitalists are beginning to talk about a universal basic income, because you're literally and systematically and structurally preparing for a society where the work itself will not be an instrument of redistribution. You will not be able to earn, and there's this discussion happening. So one is the long view, that do you see that coming era is something that India should engage with, given that we have 1/6 of humanity? And in a shorter term, what are some prescriptions that both of you would give?
So shall I just take the universal basic income? So in fact, it was Devesh Kapur, Partha, and I who wrote about 15 years ago about these, cash transfers and basic income. And as you know, the economic survey also with that. But I have come a little bit to regret this whole push towards universal basic income, partly because it's not something out, it's already happened in India. The amount of cash transfers that are happening in India is enormous. I mean, if you look at the ILO statistics, so almost 2/3 of India is getting some kind of social transfer or the other. So in India, we're almost de facto in a world of, because with Beti, all this, what's the Mahila scheme and, all these things. So we're almost there. The problem, what's going in favor of universal basic income is that it provides this minimum protection. But what we've seen in India is, one, it's led to competitive populism because of one feature of universal basic income. It is very appealing to use, but it's very appealing to abuse as well. Because if one state says, I'll give you 1,000, everyone's very happy, but the next state comes and says, we'll give you 2,000, which is even more appealing. So in some senses, universal basic income has been boomeranged a little bit, apart from the fiscal strain that it's putting on states. So UBI is something that we're almost, it's not in the future, in India we're already almost there in a different form on universal basic income.
Yeah, but again, because there's been so much disparity in India, there can't be an argument about redistribution, because also in the extreme growth years, like you said, a lot of people were pulled out of poverty. But at the same time, there's also been an escalating difference between the super wealthy and those who don't have. So I don't know what the mechanism is. But my resistance to universal basic income is not the redistribution of wealth, good, bad, ugly, but that you are preparing for a structural situation in society where by and large there's going to be such asymmetrical concentration of wealth, and people will not be able to even work to be able to earn, So that is what's really driving it in the West. I'm not saying in India, but that's where the root of the idea is in the West. And that is a frightening structure of a society.
Yeah, but I think, before we come to your last one, but I think we should not succumb to this, we can't provide jobs in India. I think our challenge ahead has to be that we will try and provide jobs to as many people as possible. So we can't throw up our hands and say, UBI, because we can't provide jobs. The AI problem, etc., is happening, but, still a lot of job opportunities in India that need to be created. So we shouldn't give up on that.
So that brings me to the prescriptions. We'll end on that. What are one or two very urgent things you need doing?
So just one thing on AI. I think we are really too focused on AI. What's really happening is a much deeper and larger change, what we call the fourth industrial revolution, which is linked with the Internet of Things, IoT, and robots. And it is the combination of all this that will have far-reaching effects. AI will just be one part of this. I mean, we sort of imply but not state, because we stayed off the prescriptions. I mean, there are two. If you ask the question, as a country, what is it we have an excess of? We don't have an excess of oil or gas or rare earths. The only thing that we truly have an excess of is people. We are 1/6 of the humanity. It's the one thing that we have so badly invested in, whether it's health, whether it's primary school, whether it's higher education. The fact that 1.5 million students, Indian students, have to go, and each time there's a conflict in Ukraine or, you find, my God, there are 20,000 Indian students studying in Ukraine. We got to pull them out. They are in Georgia, in Kyrgyzstan. We say we are good in services, but we can't provide higher education. I mean, if you look at every ASAR report on the quality of education and schooling. So if we empower our young people with the human capital and trust them to build their own future, I think that is the most powerful thing that we can do.
So I would slightly disagree with that in the following sense. That we know this is true, it's always been true, but we've been able to do very little about that. So as an exhortation, it's great, but as execution, we failed. So that's why I think we end the book by saying we will not. So we end the book by saying, look, do no harm. Remember, we end the book with the air pollution problem in Delhi. If you look at the air pollution problem, it's really a miniature for what needs to be done in India as a whole to get India on the track. Because if you look at air pollution, it involves cooperation between the center and the regions. It involves a cooperation. It requires maybe, something needs to be done to the subsidies for Punjab that create part of the burning problem. It requires action to improve regulation for all the particles and stuff that happens.
Construction, dust.
Construction, all of those things. So, if India could solve the air pollution problem, I think even Devesh's exhortation of solving the human capital problem will be achieved. Now, the thing is that when we say do no harm, we say it in this specific sense. India has had a number of major achievements: nation building, good institutions, free press, pluralism, and a reasonably good cooperation between the center and the states. These are all the pillars and the foundations for everything that's happened and everything that will happen in the future. So for God's sake, at least that which you build, don't unbuild. And that's the sense of in which you say, do no harm.
So if I could add just one last thing. I think, look, one of the things we never built, because we did not really think about that, which is sort of urbanization.
Sorry, will you speak?
Sort of our sort of urban future.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Sort of urban cities.
Right, urban cities, yeah.
Fact is, growth will come from dynamic cities. It is absolutely clear, the 74th Amendment, the states have completely sabotaged it. There is simply no doubt about it. We show, when we compare India with the other giants, US and China, if you look at where government employees are, in the US and China, the maximum are at the federal and at the local level. The minimum are at the state level. India is exactly the opposite. By far the maximum are at the state level, very few at the center and local. If we do not create a system, we talk about, the center is over-centralized, all of that. Some of it is true. The real centralization problem we are saying is between tier 2 and tier 3, namely our urban local bodies. If we do not get our cities are the future. If we do not get them and empower them, essentially instead of 28 states competing, you have essentially hundreds of cities competing with each other. That creates a completely different dynamic. And if we don't do that, it's going to be much harder.
So the reason we, I'm going to take a dig at Devesh. The reason we ended the book is because, Devesh has his pet peeves, human capital, urbanization. I have my pet peeves, and we couldn't resolve which were the more important pet peeves. So we compromised and said, do no harm. That
makes me feel very bad for being relentless with KTR earlier, because they are managing many more complex things than the two brilliant minds of two great friends who can't agree on something, So, but maybe we do need Chinese authoritarianism then. But jokes aside, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. I would love to have a series of conversations with you, because there's just so much to unpeel and to understand. But thank you, and like you said, from the lessons of the past, someone had a wonderful phrase for India that, why is there a kind of schizophrenic brilliance in the country, that you're brilliant when you go out and mediocre when you stay, That's a very depressing situation for how we are. So I have many questions to ask, whether there should be lateral entry into government. Do we need professionals? Do we need a new structure for government where I've always been opposed to some amount of privatization, but maybe definitely in Delhi, garbage, air pollution, drains, roads should be given to corporations, and government should just ensure it's well done. So maybe just all new structures, but I think people are hungry, and these are conversations we can have outside. Thank you for your analysis, your diagnosis, and we're going to hold you to new prognosis very soon. Okay. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.